in the heart of a war-torn France, when hope was a faint whisper and defeat seemed certain, a peasant girl from a small village would rise to command armies and challenge kings. Joan of Arc was no ordinary figure. She was a teenager who believed her mission came from God himself. With visions as her guide and courage as her weapon, she turned the tide of the 100 Years' War. This is the story of faith, fire, and destiny, the tale of how one girl changed the fate of a nation forever. The year was 1429, and France was fractured by decades of conflict with England in the 100 Years' War. English forces occupied large portions of the north, while the Burgundians, their allies, controlled key cities and trade routes. The French crown, weakened by internal disputes and political betrayal, seemed powerless to stop the tide of invasion. Ordinary citizens bore the brunt of the suffering. Famine, raids, and heavy taxes drained their will to fight. Many villages were burned, and survivors fled to overcrowded towns already struggling with scarcity. The sense of despair was so deep that some believed France's downfall was inevitable. In the midst of this darkness, whispers began to circulate about a young girl who claimed she had been sent by God to save France. No one could have imagined that this teenager from a remote village would soon be at the center of one of history's most remarkable turnarounds. Joan of Arc was born around 1412 in the small farming village of on the border between French and Burgundian territories. Life in was simple yet harsh. Villagers worked the land, tended livestock, and prayed for safety from roaming soldiers. Joan's parents, Jacques d'Arc and Isabel, were respected for their honesty and hard work. From an early age, Joan was known for her deep faith and unusual seriousness for someone so young. She often spent hours in prayer at the village church, listening to the bells echo through the fields. Those who knew her spoke of her kindness, but also her quiet determination. Itself was no stranger to the war's brutality. Raiding parties occasionally passed through, burning crops and stealing cattle. These encounters planted in Joan a fierce desire to protect her people, a desire that would soon find a divine calling. When Joan was about 13, she experienced something that would define her life forever. While working in her father's garden one summer day, she saw a bright light and heard a voice unlike any she had known. It was, she said, the voice of Saint Michael, the archangel, commanding her to be good and obedient to God. Over time, the voices multiplied. Saint Catherine of Alexandria and Saint Margaret of Antioch also spoke to her. They told her she was chosen to lead France to victory and see Charles, the Dauphin, crowned as the rightful king. At first, she kept these visions to herself, fearing disbelief. But as the years passed, the urgency in the voices grew. They told her the time was coming when she must act, and that God had entrusted her with a mission that would change the course of history. By 1428, the English had laid siege to, and France's survival hung by a thread. Joan knew the moment had arrived. She left to speak with Robert de Baudricourt, captain of the garrison at Vaucouleurs, telling him of her divine mission. At first, he laughed at the idea. Undeterred, Joan returned home, but soon came back with greater resolve. This time, she impressed Baudricourt with her unwavering confidence and the depth of her conviction. She even predicted a French defeat, near before news of it arrived. Baudricourt, convinced she might truly be sent by God, agreed to send her to the Dauphin. Dressed in men's clothing for protection, Joan set off on a dangerous journey through enemy territory toward Chinon. At Chinon, Charles VII, the Dauphin, decided to test Joan's authenticity. Disguising himself among his courtiers, he waited to see if she could recognize him without being told. Joan walked directly to him, bowing low and greeting him as the true king. Their private meeting remains a mystery, but witnesses recalled Charles leaving, visibly moved. Joan reportedly revealed details about his life and legitimacy that only he would know. Her certainty and charisma began to convince him she was no fraud. Charles ordered a thorough examination of her claims by theologians in Poitiers. After weeks of questioning, they declared her mission genuine and her faith sincere. Joan was given armor, a sword, and the authority to accompany the French army. The Orleans was the key to France's survival, and it had been under siege by the English for months. When Joan arrived in April 1429, morale among the French forces was dangerously low. Soldiers doubted that a teenage girl could lead them, but her presence quickly inspired hope. Carrying her white banner, emblazoned with the words, Jesus Maria, Joan entered the city to cheering crowds. She spent days rallying the troops, urging them to trust in God and fight with courage. Her faith was infectious, and soldiers began to believe victory was possible. In a series of daring assaults, Joan led from the front, braving enemy fire and refusing to retreat even when wounded. By May 8th, the English lifted the siege, a turning point in the war that cemented her reputation as a divine warrior. With Orleans liberated, Joan urged Charles to march to Reims for his coronation, as her visions had commanded. Many advisors hesitated, fearing strong enemy positions along the way, but Joan's confidence swayed both the king and his generals. The army advanced, capturing towns with little resistance. As news of Orleans' victory spread, people began to see Joan as a symbol of God's favor toward France. Her leadership transformed the war into a movement of faith and national pride. By July 1429, the path to Reims was open. The coronation would soon become the ultimate symbol of legitimacy for Charles VII. On July 17, 1429, Charles VII was crowned in Reims Cathedral, with Joan standing proudly at his side, holding her banner. For her, it was the fulfillment of God's command, the proof that her mission was real. The ceremony was deeply symbolic, not just for the king, but for a nation that had nearly lost hope. Bells rang, crowds cheered, and the French cause seemed unstoppable. Joan's fame spread across Europe. Yet, even in this moment of triumph, shadows loomed. Political intrigue, jealousy, and the unpredictability of war would soon put her in mortal danger. After the coronation, Joan pushed for an immediate march on Paris, then under Burgundian control. However, Charles hesitated, preferring diplomacy over risk. This delay gave the enemy time to strengthen their defenses. The assault on Paris in September 1429 failed, and Joan was wounded by a crossbow bolt. Though she recovered, her aura of invincibility was shaken. Some at court began to question her military judgment. Despite these setbacks, Joan continued to campaign, capturing smaller towns and maintaining her role as a figure of inspiration. But the political winds were shifting against her. In May 1430, Joan went to help defend it against a Burgundian siege. During a skirmish outside the city, she was unhorsed and trapped. The city gates closed before she could retreat, and she was taken prisoner. Her capture was a devastating blow to French morale. The Burgundians, knowing her value, sold her to the English for a large ransom. She was transported to Rouen to stand trial. In England's eyes, Joan was not a soldier. She was a dangerous heretic who threatened their claims to the French throne. Joan's trial was a political weapon disguised as a legal proceeding. The court, led by pro-English clergy, sought to discredit her visions and portray her as a witch. She was interrogated for hours on end, often without legal counsel. Her answers were remarkably sharp for a teenager with no formal education. She refused to contradict her divine mission and often turned the judge's questions back on them. Her calm defiance frustrated her accusers. Despite her composure, the verdict was a foregone conclusion. She was found guilty of heresy and sentenced to death. On May 30th, 1431, Joan was led to the marketplace in Rouen, where a stake had been prepared. She asked for a cross and prayed until the flames rose around her. Witnesses said she called out the name of Jesus as she died. Her execution was meant to destroy her legacy, but it had the opposite effect. Many present were moved to tears, and even her enemies later admitted her courage. In death, Joan became a martyr, a symbol of resistance and faith that could not be silenced. The war continued for over 2 decades after Joan's death, but her impact lingered, inspiring French forces and fueling the eventual expulsion of the English from most of France. In 1456, a retrial ordered by Pope Calixtus III declared Joan innocent of all charges, clearing her name. She was recognized as a faithful servant of God and a victim of political injustice. Her story became a rallying point for French unity and national pride for generations to come. Centuries after her death, Joan's reputation only grew. The Catholic Church began the process of canonization in the 19th century, gathering testimonies of her virtue and miracles attributed to her intercession. In 1920, Pope Benedict XV declared her a saint, honoring her as one of the most remarkable women in Christian history. She became the patron saint of France and a global symbol of courage. Her life continues to inspire books, plays, and films, each retelling a story of faith that defied the mightiest powers of her time. Joan of Arc remains one of the few historical figures who transcends politics, religion, and nationality. To some, she is a saint. To others, a warrior, a figure of unshakable conviction. Her story bridges the worlds of the medieval and the modern, reminding us that determination and belief can change the course of history. In the fields of and the streets of her name is still spoken with reverence, the name of a girl who rose from obscurity to save a nation. Joan of Arc's life was brief, but her impact was eternal. She proved that courage can come from the most unexpected places, and that a single voice, when guided by faith and conviction, can alter the destiny of a people. As we remember her, we are reminded that the greatest victories are often won not by those with the strongest armies, but by those with the strongest hearts.